Hi, you're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 212. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Barbera, and today I'm interviewing Ron Sandison, who is an adult on the autism spectrum. And he's filled with a lot of wisdom, a lot of quotes, a lot of good ideas for both parents and professionals. He's the author of a few autism books and has a new one coming out about autism and employment. He is also married for over a decade and has a 6-year-old daughter. So we talk about his early journey, his some of his gifts and talents, his help that he got from his mother, his work as a mental health professional, and some advice for kids and adults, both on the lower end of the spectrum as well as the higher end. So let's get to this important interview with Ron Sandison. Hi, Ron. It is nice to meet you. I don't think we've ever met in person or online, so thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me on your show today.
Yeah, so I've interviewed quite a few autistic adults, and I'm excited to hear your story and your tips, because you're not only an adult with autism, but you also are a mental health professional and a minister, and you go all over the country and the world speaking on autism, and you really have great advice for both parents and professionals. So before we get into that advice, let's hear about your fall into the autism world.
So my development began normal. I said my first word, mommy, at 9 months. Then at 18 months, I went through the time of regression. I went from being able to say mommy to only mom. And I went from being able to have perfect eye contact to no eye contact. My mom knew there was something drastically different between me and my brother Chuck and Steve. So she immediately took me to pediatrician. Pediatrician said, men are like fine wine. You got to give them time. Women are like flowers. They blossom quickly. And that's good advice for a woman dating, but for a person with autism, that's the worst advice you can give, because immediate intervention is the best way to develop those skills. And my mom knew time was the essence. She immediately got me an intense speech therapy, and I was in intense speech therapy all the way from age 2 to 16. When I was 7 years old, my brother Chuck would introduce me to people saying, you need to meet my brother Ron. I think he's from Norway. He'd have me talk. No one knew what I was saying, so I became an expert on Norwegian languages. At age 7, when I entered kindergarten, they wanted to diagnose me emotionally impaired. My mom said, it's not emotional, it's neurological. And if you can't tell me what's going on, I'll get them tested and come back to you. I went to Henry Ford Hospital. And in 1982, I was diagnosed with autism. And at the time I was diagnosed, there's only 1 in 10,000 children were diagnosed with autism. Now it's 1 in every 44. And the school experts and teachers told my mom, if your son's autistic, he'll never read beyond the 7th grade level. He'll never attend college. He'll never have meaningful relationships, and he'll never excel in sports. And my mom was determined, being a great mom. She quit her job as an art teacher and became a full-time Ron teacher, working with me, using art, using pre-ABA therapy methods. And at that time, there was very little known about autism. There was the refrigerator mom and the child who's stuck in his own little world. And my mom was determined to get into my world and bring me out. One of the main things she used was a prairie dog named Prairie Pup. Prairie Pup's gone on to meet Isaiah Thomas. He met Muhammad Ali in 2002. He's met many celebrities, including Screech from Saved by the Bell. When I met Kurt Armstrong, who played Booger in Revenge of the Nerds, I said, can you have a picture with Prairie Pup and your finger up your nose? And he said, I'll do better that. So Prairie Pup's been up the nose of Booger from Revenge of the Nerds. And my mom used my interest and worked with those and helped me to succeed. She believed in autism refined, not cured. Autism unrefined is you're walking on the hot black pavement to a big lake of water like the ocean, and all of a sudden you feel something sharp on your bare foot. It's a piece of glass. It wasn't refined. It was Miller time for one person who was drinking in glass, and now it's Technic-Shot for you. But autism refined is now you're walking along the ocean and along the shore, and you feel something good against your foot. it was a piece of glass that was refined by something better than greater than itself. It was refined by the ocean, refined by learning social skills and speech therapy and occupational therapy. Now that piece of glass you don't throw out, you put it on your neck is jewelry. You put it on a wall as art. And that's what my mom was determined to do with me, is teach me the way I learned. I was a visual learner. I am today still a visual learner. I can't learn anything phonetically, so I have to see things. And then by teaching me the way I learn, I'm able to grasp massive amounts of information.
Wow. So it sounds like you had quite an early journey. I do have video blogs and podcasts on a couple things you mentioned, regression. So we can link that in the show notes. This is episode 212. I also did a show on refrigerator mothers, and that was an old theory that autism was actually caused by mothers who, like your mother. I'm sure her and I would get along great because she was what I call a gung-ho mom who rolled up her sleeves and just figured it out even before there was, systematic ABA programming or anything like it. Temple Grandin, who I've interviewed for the podcast, who did the forward for my book, Turn Autism Around. We can link that in the show notes. But her mom was the same. She didn't do it herself. She hired a nanny to engage her daughter. So what age were you diagnosed with autism, Ron?
I was diagnosed at age 7 with autism.
Okay.
And also my mom used artwork. In fact, I'm in a movie that's narrated by Temple Grandin called Fierce Love and Art, and it's done by Dr. Lawrence A. Becker, and they share about my artwork in there and how my mom used it. So when I'd write my name as a child, I also had dyslexia. As you can see, I write it backwards, but my mom knew that I had great artwork ability, so she'd have me draw artwork like this when I was 5 years old. She'd have me tell her a story. She'd write down the story, have me rewrite the story. Within 2 years, I went from dyslexia to absolutely no dyslexia. But it was by working with my neural pathway of visual learning. One teacher actually told my mom, we'll do 50% of Ron's education visually, 50% phonetically, and my mom said they only get a 50% education because you can't learn anything phonetically. And to this day, I can't learn anything phonetically. I have to see it to process it. And one of the interesting things is when I was in high school, I had to take Spanish, and I got a D in the class, and it was only by the grace of the Spanish teacher, because I couldn't learn any of it, because they taught it with song and they taught it with phonetics and learning the sounding of words. But then when I got to Oral Roberts University, I took 3 years of biblical Greek, and I got a 4.0 in the class, and I took 3 years of it, and I've been a professor of biblical theology now, or biblical languages, or Greek, for now over 20 years. And the difference is this: you go to Spain, they're talking Spanish. You go to Mexico, they're talking Spanish. But you go to Greek, they're not speaking Koine Greek, which is a biblical Greek. So it's a dead language. And since it's a dead language, you can't teach it phonetically, but only visually. So I was able to master the Greek language, it's the biblical, and translate 2/3 of the New Testament from Greek into English, because you learn everything on cards, note cards, whether it's the rules of grammar, and it follows better rules of grammar than English, or whether the words, you learn them visually, because we don't know how it sounds because it's dead. And I was able to master that. So if you can find out the way the kid learns and teach them the way they learn, they're going to be able to process that information much better. And a lot of times in schools, we want to make everyone learn everything. With autism, we're specialist, not generalist. In fact, we have very difficult time generalizing things.
So, you're extremely bright, extremely fluid with conversational, language. So a lot of people listening to this podcast are parents and professionals who work with kids on the other end of the spectrum who are more impaired. And so can we talk about that, and what advice do you give for parents and professionals working with kids? And when they're 2 and 3, we don't know what their functioning level is going to be.
Yeah.
So
So
like
one of the things,
I've done a podcast very early on high functioning versus low functioning. And I don't like those two terms, because within each child or adult are their strengths and needs. And so
yeah,
you don't like those terms either. What do you say?
no. So I say higher needs, lower needs. And also one of the things that really helped me, and you can see my shirt, it's a honey badger. I call my meltdowns honey badger moments. So a lot of time with the higher needs, you need to know what in their environment is affecting them. You need to know the antecedent, what happened before they had that meltdown. And one of the things that I think that's real important, and a lot of the ones who have higher needs, who are actually thriving in life, I think of this young kid who's on the autism spectrum, who's much higher needs, but his dad takes him out running. He takes him out into society, and exposure is one of the best things you can do with any kid with autism, especially higher needs, because the more things they're exposed to, the more their body learns to adapt to their environment. And one of the things I say too is develop the skills needed to be able to adapt to their environment. So for a higher needs kid, one of the things that you may need to work on is just so they don't have a meltdown, just so they don't bite the worker they're working with. And that can create a higher quality of life, because once the parent's unable to care for them, if they end up in a group home and they're always biting and scratching, it's going to cause sometimes conflict with the person working with them. They'll say, I worked with him last time. No, you're going to be working with this guy. I don't want scratches all over my hand. But if you can develop those most simple needs of basic communication, so they know what the kid needs, meltdowns, um, outbursts, those are all communication.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
behavior is communication. So learning how they're communicating, learning the things in the environment that's going to make them have that meltdown, and learn to teach them coping skills, even if they're higher needs, that can help out a lot.
Yeah, my son is 26 and he needs 24/7 supervision. But my goal as his parent, as a registered nurse, as a behavior analyst, it has always been for him and for all my clients and my online participants is really to get the ability for children to request their wants and needs in some way, and to get major problem behaviors at or near zero, and to strive to help them get toilet trained and participate in as many self-care tasks and get those as independent as possible. Because I know as a parent and as a professional that if like Ron, you said, if you have a child or an adult who's biting and scratching, they are not going to be as able to be included in general education or in life or go to restaurants or go on airplanes if you can't trust that they're going to be calm and they're not going to be aggressive. And so that's my life's work, is getting kids to be as safe as possible, as independent as possible, and as happy as possible. And so it's not about double digit addition. It's not about talking in full sentences or reading or anything. It's about helping kids. And like you said, like develop their interest. If they really, seem to be taking to even scribbling with crayons, it could mean that they would like to develop some art skills and
Yeah.
those kind of skills. So looking for clues, and you do go around speaking, and you also speak to ABA centers. And so this is the kind of message you speak about when you go to ABA centers specifically.
Yeah, I share about find that interest, find ways of refining autism, helping them understand meltdowns and ways that create coping skills. I have the 8 keys to helping a kid with autism thrive. And one of the biggest ones too with people are lower needs is developing a hope complex, because a lot of people with autism, young adults, have developed a hopeless complex through learned hopelessness that Dr. Martin discovered in 1967 at the University of Pennsylvania. And they lack that self-efficiency, the belief that when I begin something, I'm able to accomplish it. And it's a lot of failure in relationships, failures in jobs, failures with learning social skills, and seeing that their development isn't the same as everyone else. A lot of times autism development, it's not linear. It's more like a jack in box. You're trying all kinds of things. Nothing seems to be working. All of a sudden full sentences come out where normally kids learn in a linear 1 or 2 words now, a sentence here, and then paragraphs. With autism, it can all of a sudden just begin out at paragraphs. So my development was much like that. It was very dormant for times, and then all of a sudden there was huge growth even later on in life. I didn't have good eye contact until about 2007, and I was already in my about 30 years old before I developed eye contact, and I wasn't gainfully employed until 15 years ago, and I had a master's degree, 2 bachelor's degrees, and I still wasn't until I learned those skills. And those skills, when they started developing, they develop very quickly instead of that linear progress. So
Yeah, let's
delays aren't denials with our milestones.
what, say that sentence again?
So delays with autism isn't denials in our development. So there may be delays, but it doesn't mean they're denied. They will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Okay, let's talk about your books, because you have a couple of autism books and you have one coming out in 2023. So why don't you tell us about your 2 autism books that you have now, what they're about, and then your new book.
So my first book was A Parent's Guide to Autism, Practical Advice, Biblical Wisdom, published by Charisma House, which is the 3rd biggest Christian publisher. It was one of the top selling Christian books all time on autism. And while writing, I interviewed 50 of the most famous people working in the autism field and 50 real unique people on the autism spectrum. And I share advice on parenting and also how to help a child thrive on the spectrum. And I use the insight I got from the professionals I interviewed and the parents and the young adults I interviewed. People like Alexis Weinman, Miss Montana, and Clay Marzel, the pro surfer, and Temple Grandin, and all the great advice I've gotten from her over the years. And my goal with my 3 books is to cover every age period of life. This begins with diagnosis, and even though it goes on to adulthood, it focuses more on developing those skills while a child is young. My 3rd book.
So that first book is A Parent's Guide to Autism. Is that the name?
Practical Advice, Biblical Wisdom.
Okay. And now your second book.
My second one was on theology, St. Augustine, and it's Thought, Choice, Action. So it sounds more like a movie than a book on theology. And then my 3rd book, which is on autism, is Views from the Spectrum, A Window into the Life and Faith of Your Neurodivergent Child. And for this book, I focus more on the teenage years, and I share 20 amazing people on the autism spectrum, their stories with devotional. Because a lot of times, as a kid with autism can have that hopeless complex. When parents are told their kid are autistic, a lot of times they feel hopeless. And my books offer hope. This book gives parenting advice, and it shares 20 unique people on the autism spectrum, people like Armani William, a NASCAR driver, Tarko, pro baseball player, Rachel Barcelona, who is Miss Tampa, and many others.
Rachel has been on our show too. We can link her in the show notes. She had a really great interview. So that's awesome. And now
she's an amazing person. I got to go out to Tampa in August of last year.
Oh, neat. Yeah, she seems really nice. So, and now your newest book that's coming out in 2023, what's that called and what's that about?
So I never know the titles of my books.
Oh.
I just know what the topic is, because every time I write a book, the publisher comes up with a new title for my book. So it's on autism, growth, and transitioning into adulthood. And I interviewed over 100 people who are on the autism spectrum and gainfully employed. And I interviewed over 50 professionals who work with young adults with autism and helping them gain those skills for employment. And Dr. Barry, the author of Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, he did the foreword already for the book, and I got endorsements from well-known people who work in the autism spectrum. But my goal with this book is to change the employment status of people with autism. In the United States, currently, only 3% of people with autism are gainfully employed, as I am. 80% of people with autism have never had a job, or they're unemployed. And only about 10% currently in the United States are employed at all. And many of those, about 7% of them, are not gainfully employed.
So you're
So
saying
very little amount of people
you're saying
employed,
3% are gainfully
employed, making
Wow.
good money,
Wow. Okay. So
where you
3%
could have a house, where you could have a
employed
family.
and
That's
up
what
to
my definition of
10%
gainfully employed is.
are employed in some respect, but
Capacity, yeah, like
yeah.
working, bagging groceries. And that's another story my mom used. She was inspired by Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skilled in his labor? He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men. And when I entered kindergarten in special education, they had a 2-teacher rule. You had one in the back of the room, one at the front. The one in the front made sure you wouldn't escape through the front door. The one in the back made sure you didn't make a MacGyver exit through the back door. My mom said, you're not educating people, you're babysitting young adults with autism. And she said, if he's babysat, not taught, best he's going to be is bagging groceries. Best he's going to be is a bellboy holding the door open or washing dishes. And he said, if I can get those skills, he'll serve before kings and not obscure men. And even when I did my internship in college, I did it under the world-renowned Dr. Jack Van Impe. He had more Bible verses memorized in the world than anyone else. Time of his death, he had spoken live to over 10 million people. And he took me right under his wing when he saw my talent. And Temple Grandin says it best: talent attracts mentors. And I have over 15,000 Bible verses memorized. And that's what made him mentor me and let me be his first intern for his international ministry.
Wow.
And
Wow.
well, my mom did 2 things that every person on the autism spectrum who's super successful parents did or someone did in their life. Number 1, she believed in me. She saw a gift and said, if I can refine that gift, he'll be serving me for kings and not obscure men. Number 2, she knew how to market my gifts. She taught me how to market and be an entrepreneur, and that helped me to be able to go away to college and get my master's degree. And you look at people like Temple Grandin, Grant Manier, the great artists, their parents saw that gift and they realized how to market it. Armani Williams, a NASCAR driver, his dad was able to, and mom were able to market that that passion for NASCAR driving, and now he has sponsors, which good marketers get. Or Clay Marzel, the surfer.
And I love that. Somebody that believes in you, and then somebody that helps you learn how to market your skills. Like, even for Lucas, who needs 24/7 care, like, he always had me and his father believing in him. And even, marketing, like, he goes to the food bank to volunteer with a worker, with him. That doesn't happen just by chance. That happens by us going, us saying, can he come here? This is how it would go. Oh, he can't really sit through the training and understand all the rules, but his hab worker could sit through the training and get certified as a, like, there needs to be some give and take. That he's a very good volunteer, but he doesn't have the comprehension skills to, pass a test or sit through an orientation for 2 hours and learn about being a good volunteer. Like, he doesn't understand that. So this really does apply. Your 2 things that make an adult successful is even if they are higher support needs or lower functioning or whatever you want to call it, there still needs to be that belief in them and that working towards progress. And, like Lucas is never going to be able to go to college or drive, but that doesn't mean his life is less worthy or that there's anybody failed him or there's any failure. It's just moving people forward.
Yeah, and a lot of times dads struggle with a kid with autism because they want to fix autism. Autism is not something you fix, something you deal with. And my dad actually helped me out a lot because he had a Protestant work ethic. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, if a man will not work, he shall not eat. So from an early age, he had me cutting the lawn. I had my first job in God's waiting room. I worked at Bill Knapp's restaurant where the ancient clientele gave its nickname God's waiting room. And by working at age 14 as a busser, I learned how to deal with irate customers. I learned how to budget my money. My dad had a 3-part rule to money. First 10% goes to God, second 10% goes in savings, and then the 80% you get to spend the way you want. But when you want a pair of designer shoes or jeans, you look at the Kmart brand, you minus it from the designer jeans, and then you know how much you got to take out of that 80% that you can spend on your own way. Or shoes, you go to Payless, you take the price from Payless, the average shoe, you minus it from those Nikes you want or Airwalks you want, and then you know the price you got to pay. So I learned how to budget money at a young age. I learned how to work. So I've always been employed, and even in recession times, I was employed, but not gainfully. But it took me a long time to learn that entrepreneur skills I use now to be gainfully employed.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so you have been married for a decade.
Yeah.
And happy anniversary. You just
Oh,
celebrated a
thanks.
decade of marriage. So how, and I had Carrie Magro on the show, and we can link down the show notes, and we talked about dating and relationships. And so how did you begin dating, and were you kind of late to getting into a relationship, or is your wife on the spectrum? Like how did that whole thing work?
Yeah, so my wife's not on the spectrum. So what ended up happening is I started online dating. I met my wife on Plenty of Fish. If it was Plenty of Squid, I'd still be single. If it was Plenty of Whale, I might have gotten suffocated in the dating scene. But I had to learn those skills to be able to be successful at dating. One of them is be interested, not hovering. A lot of young adults with autism, they'll hover around that person they like and they'll try and cling to. And I learned that women are like butterflies. They like to be free, and to be able to be interested but not hovering, I learned to first seek to understand and be understood, and to let the person talk. And I developed those social skills to be married by trial and error. I had a lot of trial and error in the dating. In fact, I met over 300 women online before I met my wife, and then
Oh my
we just
goodness.
ended up clinking. But I learned how to develop those skills to be socially filtered, so I didn't just spew something out like Trump on Twitter. And by learning those skills, that helped me to be able to be ready for marriage. And that's very hard for a lot of people with autism, because after probably 10 dates and they don't work out, they may give up. But there's a saying Charles Spurgeon said, by perseverance, the snail made it on the ark. So you could be as slow as a snail, but if you're moving in the right direction, you're going to get to your goal. And that's kind of how my dating life began, is very slow. I had a lot of pitfalls along the way where I wasn't successful, but then I learned those skills and I developed those skills and I honed in on those skills. And one of the things that really helped me was a guy named Steve Jones, who every girl liked. He was 6'3", good-looking guy, had great people skills, and by imitating his people skills, I learned those in the dating scene, became successful at being able to date, which led to me being successful and being able to get married and have
Wow.
a
And you
daughter
also
who's
have
6
a
years old
daughter?
now. A daughter, yeah, she's 6 years old, Mikhail Marie,
Wow, that's
in
awesome.
first grade.
So does your autism Does it affect your relationships with your wife and your daughter, or do you have more difficulties, or is it just kind of like every marriage and being a father? It's hard to separate out what autism is adding or making more difficult.
I think it's more difficult because I'm very focused. When I'm focusing on something, my wife one time said, sometimes I feel like a single mom because you're so focused on writing your book, or you're so focused on reading that book you're reading, or the research you're doing, or the project you're working on. And two, I'll still sometimes have my autistic meltdowns. I remember when I was in the movie Fierce Love and Art, my mom took some of the toys out of my man cave. I have a man cave with um, hundreds of boxes of calico critters in boxes, and all these animals from around the world, all the way from Madagascar to Israel, where I've traveled. And she rebuilt this no man's valley that I'd had as a kid. And she took the animals off the shelf from where they were in my man cave at my parents' house that's kept lock and key. And then I had a meltdown, and I started banging my head like this and said, doesn't make any sense. All this stuff is moved. And my daughter came in. She was 3 years at the time. She said, sometimes you'll get a Happy Meal and it doesn't have the toy in it. But
Your
tomorrow,
3-year-old
maybe
told
grandma
you
will
that.
get you a new toy. That's what she said.
So you
So
still have meltdowns and
once in a great while. That was the last meltdown. That was 3 years ago. But certain things can make me trigger. They're not as bad as they used to be because I was only going about this hard. But when I was a kid, I slammed my head full force into a cement wall. So they're very much milder, and I can still control myself somewhat now. But when I was a kid, I couldn't with those
yeah.
meltdowns.
Well, and regular adults, without autism, I mean, we have meltdowns. I mean,
Yeah.
crying episodes, and worse, slamming things on a desk, or
Mm-hmm.
people could throw things, and maybe,
Yeah.
it's when you get completely overwhelmed. And well, I always say, if you see problem behaviors, the demands are too high and or reinforcement's too low, or
Mm-hmm.
you have some kind of illness which can spur on problems, like strep or staph or something, can actually make you exhibit some behaviors. I did a podcast episode, for instance, on PANS, and that can make you, somebody like me or you, a child or a young adult could get some kind of infection, and it could spur on more meltdowns or
Yeah.
more of a psychiatric syndrome and psychiatric issues. And you do work as a mental health professional full time, right?
Yeah, full time, 40 hours a week. Yeah.
Wow.
2 12-hour shifts and a 16-hour shift every week.
Wow. So
And
you
I've
are
never missed a day of work in 15 years.
what?
Yeah. In fact, when COVID came, I got 3 days in with COVID before they tested me and said, you got to take a couple of days off work. So even then, I was willing to work full time. I had to take 5 days off for it. And I had to take those days off, but I was willing to work. I never liked missing work.
Oh, that's amazing. So, you're very passionate about sharing your journey. Why are you so passionate?
One of the reasons I'm passionate about sharing my journey with autism is I realize the struggles that young adults with autism have. They see all their friends having fun at birthday parties and they may not be invited. They see they get wedding invitations when they're young adults to their friends getting married and they're still single. And they see their friends in their dream careers while they're still working, making just enough to get by, and sometimes even still living with mom and dad. And I want the young adults and the people coming after me to have that advocacy so that they're gainfully employed and they're living the best life they can live. And the United States, as I mentioned, 80% of people with autism are unemployed. In Europe, it's only 20%. And here's the difference. Europe, they have universal health care. So a person with autism doesn't have to worry about their benefits. In the United States, we don't have universal health care. So you could work full time, have a health care plan for your company, and you could be losing money by working. And it's the only country in the world like that. Your health care bills could be higher than what you're making as an employment. We say autism is a lifelong what? Disability. So if autism is a lifelong disability, why don't we have lifelong benefits? Here's the second reason why so many people with autism are unemployed. And in the 30-year history of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's never done one thing. And you know what that is? Led to higher employment. And I could tomorrow make 80% of people with autism gainfully employed in the United States. I'd have to do two things. First, I bring universal health care for people with autism. Once you're diagnosed with autism, you have health care benefits. It doesn't matter where you work. You already have those. Now a company is going to hire you. I don't have to pay out benefits towards health care. Second one is this, privatization. I had an uncle with autism. He was Asperger's, Uncle Dave, and he was gainfully employed his whole life. But the reason he was gainfully employed is he had a job that loved routine. In fact, if your Christmas present was late in the 80s, it just might have been Uncle Dave working the postal services. But now we take these jobs that once were with the government, where you had a union, you had benefits, and you had job security, and we privatize them out to other companies. So why would you hire someone with a disability who's going to make your insurance costs go up? When you worked for the government, you didn't have to worry about that. And with set price for a set commodity, when something's privatized, you can cut everyone else's wages and you make a fortune. And privatization is one of the main reasons why people with autism are gainfully employed and not having universal health care. My Uncle Dave, when he died, they said he was so slow, you needed a pole to make sure he was moving. Yet he was gainfully employed because he worked for the U.S. Postal Service and he enjoyed his job. Most people wouldn't like doing the same route over and over again for 35 plus years. But Uncle Dave loved that because on the autism spectrum, his job didn't change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I can totally see that. Well, I do think you make some excellent points about why our kids and adults are not employed as well as Europe. And I can see that for both ends of the spectrum too. So before I let you go, it's been a really great interview. I've enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm sure my listeners have too. So part of my podcast goals are not to just help the kids, but help the parents and professionals working with the kids. So to be happier, to be less stressed. So do you have any self-care tips or stress management tools that you use in your daily life that might help?
Yeah, so one of the things about stress and anxiety is you miss out on opportunities. There's a great book called The Luck Factor, and it looks at people who say they're lucky versus people who say they're unlucky. And Dr. Wiseman did an experiment on people who say they're lucky versus unlucky. He had 150 people said, I'm the luckiest person in the world. 150 said, I'm the least lucky person in the world. And what he did is his study is he had a $20 bill in front of a coffee shop, and he had them go to the coffee shop, and the contestants in the experiment thought they were going there to meet a connection. And if you were lucky, you'd meet the connection. If you were unlucky, you wouldn't meet them. But the real test was see who found that $20 bill. What he discovered in his study is that 80% of people who said they were lucky discovered that $20 bill, where only 20% of people were unlucky. And of course, it wasn't luck that made them find it or unluck, but it was this level of anxiety after doing tests on them. So the people who say they were lucky, they experienced a lot less anxiety. They came there living in the moment. And when that $20 bill was under their nose, they found it. People who said they were unlucky were thinking about all the things they had to do, washing dishes or going to work, a job they didn't like, and they walked right past it because their minds were clouded with this anxiety. So we can learn ways to lower our anxiety and lower our stress level. We're going to see more opportunities, and we're going to also experience better health and well-being. Today alone, 2,300 people are going to die of heart disease and stroke. caused by anxiety. So the way I keep calm and relax is, number one, I take my dog Rudy out for a walk. Walking, smelling the Michigan clean air, pure Michigan, as Tim Allen would say, it helps me relax. I have my prairie dog who I still take everywhere I speak, and being able to speak, I feel relaxed. So being in the zone, like Michael Jordan would say, when you're in that zone, your anxiety goes down. So find things you enjoy. My grandpa had two sayings: it is what it is, and you got to take life as it comes to you. He lived to 89 years old because he kept his stress down. His other was this: I just did my exercise for the day. And learning to be able to take life as it comes to you and be relaxed, it's going to lessen anxiety, it's going to open opportunities, and it's going to help us be more successful and have the strength to help the children we're working with, or help our own children who are on the spectrum. And that's very important. And just taking time with your family. I try to spend time with Michaela and play games. She likes the game Sorry and some of the other Hungry Hippos and some of those, and being able to relax. And cheerful heart is good medicine. So laughter is very important too.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, I think I am lucky to have met you.
Oh, thanks.
I wish you all the best and good luck with your newest book, and Happy New Year.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Airing this
2023.
2023, and your newest book is going to come out. And yeah, so what's your website too for people?
So it's spectruminclusion.com. And then all my books are on Amazon, all three of them. And all you got to do, Google is Ron Sandison. And then those books will come right up. I'll send you the link so you can put them on there.
Yeah, we'll put everything in the show notes, marybarbera.com/212. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.